Begin Self-Publishing, episode number 32. Selling books in the Spanish-speaking world with Cristian Perfumo.
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
On today's show, I interview Cristian Perfumo. He is a Spanish-speaking author who's released several books to the Spanish Amazon store and has also sold books to Latin America. He's recently translated his latest book into English and has also started up a service for Spanish-speaking books called Ebrolis, which is very similar to services like BookBub for the English-speaking market. He has basically built up a massive email list of Spanish Kindle and other ebook buyers. He was amazed that there wasn't one already in existence, and this is because the Spanish-speaking ebook market is nowhere near as mature as the English-speaking ebook market. So now over to the interview. Hi Cristian, what are the main differences between marketing a book in the Spanish-speaking world as opposed to in the English-speaking world, would you say?
Hi Tim, how are you? Well, I believe that the basics are the same. So basically, if you have an email list, if you have a platform, you can use all of that to market your book. I believe that the ebook market in Spanish is way behind the ebook market in English. So if you implement all of the practices that you do for your English books, for your Spanish books, now you're way ahead of the rest, if that makes any sense. So for example, very few Spanish-speaking authors have email lists. I just cannot believe that. And I actually recorded a podcast about that with a podcast similar to yours, but targeted at Spanish authors. And there are way fewer services like, BookBub, Fácil Librarian and stuff like that. But other than that, I believe that it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, okay. And are there any differences between Spain and South America, and are there differences between the countries in South America in terms of the approach to marketing you would take?
Oh, in terms of the approach to marketing, I think there aren't any differences. So people from Spain buy their books on Amazon.es. There's obviously iTunes and the other retailers, but if it's Amazon, which is the majority of the books sold in Spanish, if they live in Spain, they're going to buy on Amazon.es, and if they live in Latin America, they're going to buy on Amazon.com, except for Mexico, because Mexico has its own Amazon. So I guess if you're marketing a book to those people, you have to be aware of where you're sending them to in terms of links. And there are little services that let you obviously enter the details of your book, and they give you a universal link that you can use. So whoever opens it, it will send them to their Amazon store. And that'll be one thing to take into account. The other thing to take into account, perhaps not so much about marketing, but about differences between the two markets, is that Spanish people, as in people from Spain, are less receptive to translations done in Latin American Spanish. And the other way around is not the case, or less so. So in other words, if you have a book that's been translated by Castilian Spanish-speaking person, so someone from Spain, and then you are trying to market that book in Latin America, you won't find as many people who, criticize the book because of the translation as if you did it the other way around. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say it was that way around with the English and US English. I can understand. So people are, as you're saying, basically South American people will accept a book translated into Spanish, but Spanish people will be less likely to accept a book that's written in South American variant of Spanish.
That's correct. Yeah, and it's particularly acute when it comes to translations. So I think maybe it's a psychological process, or I think it's a mental thing where a person from Spain will read a book and he knows it's a translation because the author is called John Smith, a very English sounding name.
Yeah.
And when they're reading it, the text reads a little bit jarring to them just because it's translated into a different dialect of Spanish. And they will attribute that to the translation rather than the fact that the translator was from Ecuador or wherever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they blame it on the translation, even though it's perhaps not the translation.
Okay. Just a thought that's occurred to me. Do you find many sales to Spanish speakers in the US? I mean, I know there is a large chunk of the US population that are at least second language Spanish speakers. Do you find any of your sales of your books to the US markets in the Spanish language, or have you not seen that at all?
I do, Tim, but unfortunately I cannot tell, just because, like I told you, the whole of Latin America, except for Mexico, buys in Amazon.com. So the sales, if I get a sale on Amazon.com, there's no way for me to know whether it comes from Peru or from the US.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So you don't know whether it's actually American.
No, there's no way
Spanish.
for me to know.
Yeah.
But one thing I can tell you, though, I have one of my books for free on Wattpad. You know the platform?
Yeah.
Okay. So in Wattpad, you can one of the analytics options there is to see where your readers come from, and in my case, it's about 10% of my readers coming from the United States.
Oh, okay. And that's in Spanish you're writing on Wattpad, isn't it?
Yes, that's in Spanish. Yes.
Okay. So you've started up this Brolis email service, a similar kind of marketing thing to BookBub in the UK and the US. Why did you decide to set up the Brolis email service? Which countries is it designed to cover? Is it just Spain, or is it the whole Spanish-speaking world?
No, it's a whole Spanish-speaking world. So when users sign up, they choose, obviously the categories that they like, but also where they are in the world and what retailers they buy books from. So, for example, they can say, I'm in Spain and I buy from Amazon, so we'll send them links to Amazon.es. So we personalize the links based on what they told us about where they are and where they buy books. We have about between 55 and 60% of our subscribers are from Spain.
Okay.
So it's by a long way the largest country in terms of subscribers, because then we have 10% in Mexico, 10% Argentina, etc. And the reason I started it was because obviously I am a self-published author. I put out a couple of books. I've got 3 so far in Spanish and 1 in English. Yeah. Which is a translation of one of my Spanish books. And because I've been living in Australia for 6 years, I am very, very well aware of the self-publishing world in the English-speaking world, and I knew about BookBub. I knew about all of the things that the English-speaking authors are doing, and there was nothing like that in Spanish. So I thought, okay, well, I am an author. I'm also a computer scientist, so I can perhaps give it a crack. And then I talked to an old friend of mine who we went to uni together, and he's also a software developer, and together we created Brolis. Okay.
How are you doing with that at the moment? Are you building up a decent amount of followers to your email list? I mean, this is the thing. You're in effect, you're concentrating marketing in this one list for everybody. Do you find it stronger in some genres than in others, or have you noticed anything about the Spanish market in that regard?
Yes, absolutely. So, as to how we're doing, I think we're doing really well. We have about 15,000 subscribers.
Oh, okay, yeah, so quite a lot then, yeah.
Yeah, and we've been live for about 5 months. So that the average there is about 100 subscribers per day. So it's going quite well in that regard. In terms of, I think the other question was about categories. Is that right? So so I think there's no surprises here. It's basically what you would expect for English-speaking books as well. So I'm looking at the stats right now, and the most popular category is thriller with about 8,000 people. And then right next to it, like pretty much at the same level, we have romance, and then we have action adventure. So those are the 3 more popular ones. And then there's a big jump from there to 6,000 people, and that's fantasy, historical fiction, literary fiction, science fiction. So those 5 categories, and young adult. So all 5 categories are pretty much all at 6,000 people. And then it tapers off, like there's erotica, horror, etc., etc. But yeah, mystery, romance, and thriller, action adventure are the most popular ones.
Okay, that's interesting to know. If someone is going to get their book translated into Spanish or from Spanish into English, what advice would you give them, given that you've you've done it from Spanish into English anyway?
Yeah, so my advice would be that they shouldn't think that the translator is going to produce something that's ready to go to Amazon, or I say Amazon, but any retailer. So they're not going to produce something that's ready for publication. I like to think that once a translator has translated the book, it goes back to the draft state. So it needs to be proofread, it needs to be line edited and stuff like that. Obviously, there is no story editing. You're not going to be changing stuff about the story because the story is already written.
Yeah.
But in terms of language and in terms of how it reads and the flow, there needs to be more than one pair of eyes on it to get it to an acceptable levels. So perhaps if you're thinking of translating your book, and the translator says that it's going to be 6 cents per word, and you do the maths and you go, yep, I need $4,000 to translate my book. Don't just think that it's that money. On top of that, you will have to hire an editor and a proofreader. Otherwise, it's going to go on Amazon and you're going to start getting very bad reviews about the translation.
Yeah, and presumably the editor needs to be in the language you're translating into. Because you speak, clearly you speak quite good English. So did you deal with an English proofreader and editor? And would somebody translating into Spanish have to find a bilingual Spanish editor, in effect?
Yeah, so a couple of things there. Yes, I did deal with my translator was Irish.
Yeah.
But on top of that, he's Irish, so he's a native English speaker. He's a linguist. He's doing a PhD in linguistics. And he is married to a Spanish lady, so he speaks really, really good Spanish. But I do speak English, and therefore I could, go through the manuscript and read it and make comments and spot things here and there. But that won't be the case for most people, and it certainly wouldn't be the case for me if I was translating my book into any other language.
Yeah.
If you're not counting on that, I think a very important thing to take into account there is if you're translating your book, it needs to be done by someone who, first of all, is a native speaker of the language you translated the book into. So if you're translating your book from English to Spanish, the person has to be a native speaker of Spanish.
Yeah.
It cannot be an English-speaking person who knows Spanish or who's lived in a Spanish-speaking country, even if it's for 10 years, that doesn't count. But on top of that, apart from being a native speaker, they have to be a translator.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So translation is basically
an
art form.
Yeah.
It's kind of rewriting a book. So they have to know what they're doing. They have to have a complete command of the language, but on top of that, they have to know translation.
Yeah. So I was asking more about, because you say that you need somebody to proofread it and edit it afterwards.
Oh, okay, yeah.
In terms of them, how would you find them? I mean, would they need to also be bilingual as well?
No. And I actually would advise that they're not.
Okay.
So what happens is, even the best translator, if you think about it, they have the 2 languages in their head, right?
Yeah.
So when they're translating, they will have a dominant language, which is the native language, and that's the language, like I said, they translate into. But then, because they can speak both languages, they will inevitably make mistakes and use things that, I think they're called false friends. So something that sounds kind of similar in English and in Spanish, but they have a completely different meaning, or constructions that sound a little bit awkward in the other language. So if you hire someone who is not a bilingual person, they can only speak the language that you're translating the book into, then those people are gonna basically pick up those things really, really quickly because they're going to be super jarring for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you are translated into Spanish, for example, the problem is like, so ideally you would get someone who doesn't speak any English, but how can you contact them? You know,
Yeah,
like
well,
inevitably.
it's a catch-22 situation.
Yeah, but no, they don't have to be translators or anything like that. They just have to be good editors in that language.
Okay, and would you? I mean, is it a wise idea to get the translator to talk to them, or do you think that's a bad idea?
Well, if you trust the translator and if you think that the translator is genuinely going to give this work to another person and there's going to be another pair of eyes looking at your manuscript, I believe that's a good idea, because if someone's making a living from translating books, they probably know people who edit books and proofread books, so that could be a good idea, yes.
Okay. Do you think that it is worthwhile for an English speaker translating their book into Spanish at the moment, or should they wait?
No, I think so. I think if you're thinking of entering a foreign market, then you should definitely translate your book into Spanish instead of any other language.
Oh, okay.
However, if you have maybe 1 or 2 books, I think your time is best spent writing your next book. So if you have a big catalog and you want to have a go at translating your book, by all means. But even though you won't be doing the translation, it still takes a lot of time, because you're going to have to, coordinate with the translator. You're going to have to find that proofreader. You're going to have to then think about how you're going to market that book and all of that. And the problem that you're going to have there is that there's absolutely no way of leveraging your existing platform for what you're doing, right? Like, even if you have 100,000 people on your email list, if you send them an email saying, hey, here's my Spanish translation, it's probably going to be, 10 sales out of that,
Yeah, unless you happen to find these bilingual Americans on your email list. And even then, they probably wouldn't be, the people who would want to read it in Spanish wouldn't be on the English language list. So.
Yeah, because they already read it if they're on your email list, they're fans of yours, and if they're fans of yours, they already read your books in the original language. Why would they want to read the translation?
Yeah, exactly. Where can people find out about Abrolhos, you and your books, both in English and in Spanish, if there are any Spanish listeners to the show?
Yes, Abrolhos, they can find on abrolhos.com. That's EBROLIS.com. If they just go to that address, then obviously it's going to be all in Spanish because it's all targeted to Spanish speakers. But if they go Abrolhos, EBROLIS.com/authors, then there's an English page there with all of the information about the book and how you can, the service, and how you can submit your book if you happen to have Spanish translations. So it's all there in English. They can find out everything about the service there. For me, if anyone's interested, they can go to my personal webpage, which is my first name and then my last name, so Cristian with no H, and then Perfumo, like perfume, but with an O instead of an E at the end.
Yeah.
.com/EN for English, and that's me there. So yeah, and if you have any questions at all, drop me a line at Cristian@abrolhos.com. Whether it's about my books or about the service, I'm happy to answer any questions there.
Okay. What about Twitter and social media? Is there anywhere on there that you want people can contact you?
Yes, absolutely. Cristian Perfumo, that's my Twitter handle, and then I'm also on Facebook. So, yep, definitely.
Okay. Well, it's been very nice to chat to you today. Thanks for your
It's been
time,
fantastic,
Cristian.
Tim. Thank you for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.